Good morning, Dan and Amy. So the Illinois political ruling class, at least much of it, says you cannot balance the Illinois state budget, a constitutionally balanced budget, not a phony baloney, $7.5 billion out of balance budget, but a real balanced budget as mandated by the Constitution. You can't do it without a tax increase. Oh, and gambling revenue and all kinds of other sorts of typical cowardly plays by the political class in Illinois that has led us to be the worst governed state in the nation. Chicago, the worst governed city in the nation, highest unfunded liabilities, lowest credit rating, largest outmigration, all of the quality of life metrics we routinely describe and discuss on this show. Can't do it without increasing taxes. Can't right the ship, can't get us on a path to solvency growth without raising taxes. Well, John Tillman and his group over at the Illinois Policy Institute disagree, and they've put their plan where their rhetoric is, producing a budget they're releasing today that does exactly that. Balances the state budget, the constitutional mandate is abided without raising taxes. What does that budget look like? For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Illinois Policy Institute Chairman and CEO John Tillman. John, thanks for joining us.
Hey, Dan, Amy, thanks for having me on. And I don't think your show's moniker has ever been more appropriate, The Answer, and we have it here.
Okay,
Oh, there you go.
so, and I should disclose I'm affiliated with the Illinois Policy Institute, so factor that in however you'd like.
And I should disclose that I like John Tillman.
I'm glad that disclosure was
well,
made.
Amy, I should disclose I like you, too.
Okay, all right. Break it up, you two.
Yeah.
Goodness sakes. All right, so what is the budgetary answer? Because Senate Republican superminority leader Christine Radogno, when she's not doing her Beaker impersonation from the Muppets, she is proposing tax increases along with Senate President John Cullerton, and you say that's not necessary. So how do we get from here to there without tax increases?
Well, it does take courage, Dan. As you know, there's a short supply of that in Springfield, unfortunately, particularly among the Senate leaders and the way they're discussing this, to be frank. The bottom line is this. You have to slow the rate of growth of spending so that it grows more slowly than revenues. And the easy way to raise revenues is by raising taxes, which, of course, means you're taking more money out of the pockets of already struggling taxpayers and citizens here in Illinois who have said the deal stinks, so that's why we're leaving in record numbers. So you have to slow the growth of spending. What the Senate discussion fails to do is address the drivers of spending. What our proposal does is address every major driver of spending at the state and local level, and that is how we close the $7.1 billion budget gap. We address the issue of out-of-control property taxes with a property tax freeze. We address the issue of the state subsidizing local government and hiding spending at local government so that they're not accountable to their local taxpayers. In order to help pay for that, we give local governments greater control over their own budget, over their own collective bargaining, over prevailing wages, and all the things that drive out-of-control local government spending. We reform and innovate within Medicaid spending. We ask AFSCME to get on a more equal and fair footing with the taxpayers who actually make less money than AFSCME members, and ask AFSCME members who are the wealthy in this state to pay a little bit more of their fair share, and a variety of other steps. These are all simple concepts. All have been introduced in the General Assembly before in some form or fashion. All have been done in other states. But amazingly, Senator Radogno and Senator Cullerton and too many people in Springfield seem to only want to talk about attacking the taxpayer's income.
Yeah, because they love to spend money we don't have. But I wanted to dig in deeper when you mentioned slow spending or slow the speed of spending. Exactly what does that mean and how would it work?
Well, it's a simple idea, Amy. If spending grows faster than the money you take in, that's what creates a structural deficit. We've been doing that for about 30 years, and especially over the last 10 to 12 years at a very rapid rate. So what you have to, and so when we raised the income taxes in 2011, it was a $7 billion a year tax hike, and we were told that this would solve the problem by giving us revenues at a higher rate than spending. And, of course, none of that happened because they kept spending at a record rate because they didn't reform the things that drive spending. So what is driving out-of-control spending? Pensions. Right now, pensions have gone from, in 2011, an $87 billion unfunded pension to $130 billion in unfunded pensions. And now pensions consume 25% of our entire budget. Medicaid and health care spending consume 25% of our entire budget. Those numbers are, so that's 50% of the total. Those numbers are up dramatically. The reason that services for the poor, the reason that college education is getting cut, the reason that money for local schools is at risk is because of out-of-control pensions, out-of-control health care, and these other drivers. Our plan fixes all of that. Let me just give you an example with pensions. Everybody says you can't fix the pension plan. There's already a solution in law at the state university level. About 20,000 university employees are on a self-managed plan that allows them to control their own retirement. They have a hybrid plan that is a combination of a 401k and a bit of a defined benefit program. What that plan does is essentially give control of their entire retirement in a secure way to the employee, not to politicians. What we're suggesting is opening that plan up to all employees and having all new employees go on that plan. If we did that over time, eventually we'd wind down the out-of-control pension plan that we currently have and solve our pension problem. That's just one example.
Well, on the pension issue then, so that plan that those 20,000 odd university employees are in, that passes constitutional muster as far as we know. So the argument that, well, the Supreme Court has ruled and that provision in the Constitution means you can't diminish benefits, so we can't bend the cost curve for pensions. If you just scaled that relatively small group of employees, scaled that plan to the entire to all five pension systems, then you actually could do those things and you wouldn't have the constitutional problem. That's what you're suggesting?
That's exactly correct. Now, that's the most important part. And here's the other part that's beautiful about this. Not only is it constitutional, because for new employees, you can have any kind of plan you want. That always passes constitutional muster, according to what the Illinois Supreme Court has said. So this plan would then be available to new employees. But the smart part about this that Ted Dabrowski, our Vice President of Policy, came up with is let's make this plan an optional choice for current employees. So right now, there's people that have been getting employed since 2011 are in what's called Tier 2. Without getting too much in the weeds, essentially Tier 2 workers are getting cheated. They're subsidizing longer-term employees in their retirement. It's a very unfair deal to them. This would allow them to opt out of the Tier 2 into this new plan that would be much better for them, much more secure for them. And over time, it would take till about the year 2030, more than half of the entire workforce then would be in this new plan. And by 2047, the old plan would be completely shut down. Remember, that's important because it's the current plan that is in part bankrupting the state, and that's why it has to be shut down. So it gives workers a choice, Dan. That's the beauty of it.
So that's a quarter of the budget. Let's talk about the other big-ticket systems, because the governor has been reticent, leery of the repeal of Obamacare. Of course, Medicaid expansion under Obamacare, it's not bankrupting the state. Medicaid is bankrupting the state, but the expansion will really bankrupt the state if it isn't rolled back to the original eligibility requirements. That's one issue. He's also talked about wanting to spend more money on K through 12 education. How do those two positions the governor has taken square with the possibility of a balanced budget?
Well, we think that the governor and the administration should embrace the reform of Obamacare. One example of that in terms of Medicaid spending is the expansion of Medicaid brought in about 600,000 able-bodied single individuals into Medicaid. And if we simply reverse that and went back to the way it was before, we could save all kinds of money by obviously by having those people go off and go back into an employer plan or into an Obamacare plan. And then that money could be saved, and we could concentrate the resources on the poorest among us. The categories vary, but between that's about $190 million in savings, another $100 million in savings with lower drug cost by utilizing some ambulatory surgical centers, outpatient services, and a few other. Actually, it's about $125 million, I should have said, in terms of taking those able-bodied people back off of Medicaid. But in total, there's about $415 million in savings by streamlining Medicaid alone. Another $500 million in higher education by concentrating dollars on teachers and the classroom instead of administrators. We've had an explosion of administrators across the country, but even worse in Illinois, and administrators are extremely expensive. That would be another example. And then another example where we can save about $1.1 billion is by implementing the governor's last best offer to Ask Me and adding in a few other things, cutting payroll by about a little over 10%, about $500 million in total. That's about $1.1 billion.
Wow. You're so good with the numbers. No, seriously. So this
Well,
plan, no, honestly, I respect you and I think it's wonderful. But how can you get this plan in front of lawmakers?
Well, we're very excited that when we do our press conference later this morning, Representative Ives and Representative Skillicorn will be joining us. These are two extremely brave legislators. There's tremendous pressure on legislators in both the House and Senate to stay silent right now while Senate Leader Radonio on the Republican side and Senate President Cullerton on the Democrat side continue to negotiate what appears by all counts to be a very bad deal. I'd be more excited about their negotiations if they were actually talking about their concern for taxpayers, but what they're really talking about is their concern for taking more money from taxpayers seems to be all the news that's coming out. So Representatives Ives and Skillicorn, I think, have been very courageous in coming to stand with us. We've talked to many legislators privately. They're enthusiastic about many elements of this plan, and we've talked to the governor and his staff, and those have been very productive discussions, and I think there are many elements of it that eventually will get take up. But right now, everybody seems to want to sit silently and let the Senate conversations I'm hoping fall apart.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that the argument is, I've described Christine Radonio's negotiating the Republican Party's surrender to Chicago Democrats, but it seems to me they're going to say, and I've heard this from, well, yeah, but that we can never pass what the Illinois Policy Institute is proposing because Madigan and Cullerton won't go for it. Well, so we'll just pass something that they will go for, which, of course, is detrimental to the state. The logic of that escapes me, but nonetheless, it's kind of the whole art of the possible argument that's being advanced by legislators. So what do you say to that about, we've got to pass some kind of balanced budget and it's got to be something that's feasible given the political power distribution in Springfield?
Let us remember, Dan, that the art of compromise between Democrats and Republicans and, quote-unquote, doing something is what created the exact crisis we're in right now. That exact thinking that you just expressed that they have is what created this crisis. We are here because of that kind of thinking, because it was more important to people to pass something that was politically viable and would pop the balloon of pressure among the punditry and media class and the public and put us on a path of Armageddon, which is where we're at. That is, to be blunt about it, stupid. What we should be, that's a public policy term we like to use.
Yes.
What
those
we
today.
should be doing is actually addressing the true causes of the crisis. And if now Republicans are theoretically the party of fiscal responsibility, if they are unable to get this kind of reform passed, they should then let the Democrats own the solution. They have majority control of both chambers, and let them pass something and put it on the governor's desk, and let's see what he does with it. Let the Democrats make a statement that they want to take more money, again, from the people of Illinois and not address the underlying problem, which is pensions, health care, Medicaid, the ASME contract, out-of-control administration, explosion of cost at the collegiate, the university level, and so forth. Let them make their argument, and let's make ours. That's what I would say for fiscally responsible people.
All right. He is John Tillman, Chairman and CEO of the Illinois Policy Institute. You can get a copy of that budget document at illinoispolicy.org, and we'll tweet it out at Amy Jacobson, at Dan Proft as well. John Tillman, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Listen to Dan and Amy on your